It's not just like an anti-Semitic tragedy, but it is a very disturbing and angering personal attack. It is very far from being dealt with. There's nothing really that the French government is doing to protect the Jewish community in France. It's been decades.
That's the voice of Canadian-born Israeli Knesset member Sharren Haskel. She was speaking a few days ago to a TV interviewer after her grandmother, who was 88 and lives in France, was allegedly attacked and viciously beaten near her house in the Paris area. The woman told police she was on her way to do some blood tests when she was assaulted on June 24th by two Arab suspects who called her a dirty Jew, kicked her in the back and then in the face so hard that she lost a tooth. The police were told that she was wearing her Star of David necklace and that her assailants told her she deserved it. Haskel decided to go public because she's alarmed at the dangerous situation facing Jews in France, where antisemitism has been on the rise for years, but last year skyrocketed by 400%, according to government figures, and is way up since October 7th. She's warning that the French government has failed to protect its Jews, a country dear to her because it's where her mother and grandparents lived after the family fled Morocco. And many commentators aren't sure whether the situation will improve or get worse after the results of the weekend election in France that saw a surge in votes both for the far-right party, led by Marine Le Pen with a troubling neo-Nazi and Holocaust denial past, but also the surprising victory of a leftist coalition whose leader sides with Palestine, denies anti-Semitic chants are heard during his rallies, said the leading Jewish French organization CRIF had too much power and blamed Jews for killing Jesus. While Haskel doesn't yet put Canada in the same category as France when it comes to the future of our Jewish community, she says Canadian politicians need to wake up to what's happening in Europe and the Middle East and realize who's behind it all.
I know right now we're at the front line of this clash of civilizations between radical Islam and the Western society. I know that. And I know how, in a generation or two, people are going to look at it. I hope so, because I hope we actually win.
I'm Ellin Bessner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Tuesday, July the 9th, 2024. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News.
Is life really miserable for the Jews, or are we just glued to a 24-hour news cycle?
Should we be worried that so many young rabbis are coming out of seminary as anti-Zionists?
And what does Judaism say about polyamory?
If you want answers to these questions, well, we don't have any. But we do love asking them. Each week, tune into Bonjour Chai to hear debates and hot takes by me, Avi Feingold,
And me, Phoebe Maltz-Bovey,
as we sit down with pundits, rabbis, and scholars to talk about the most pressing issues facing Jews in Canada and around the world.
Listen and subscribe to Bonjour Chai at thecjn.ca/bonjour or wherever you get your podcasts.
Sharren Haskel had to give up her Canadian passport when she ran for the Knesset nearly 10 years ago. She entered politics in 2015 as a member of the Likud party under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, at 40, she's not only split from both the Likud and Netanyahu, but sits in opposition with Gideon Saar's right-wing conservative New Hope United Right Alliance list. But she still serves on some of the Knesset's important committees, including finance and national security, and she chairs the Knesset caucus on what to do about UNRWA, the United Nations Refugee and Works Agency, believed to have played an integral part in Hamas's attack on October 7th and in the ongoing war in Gaza. Haskel still has strong ties to Canada, not the least of which is because her father lives here. She's angry with how the Canadian government has, in her words, stabbed Israel in the back by resuming funding for UNRWA and by banning arms sales to help Israel. Haskel recently came to Canada on a speaking tour sponsored by a Jewish group called the Exigent Foundation. They brought her to Ottawa and to Toronto to meet journalists and politicians and also to speak to the Jewish community at Temple Sinai Synagogue in Toronto. Haskel joined us at the CJN Daily at the end of her trip, and because of security risks, we agreed not to air the interview until she was safely home. It's a pleasure to meet you. You've been to Canada many times, but not since October 7th, right?
Right. Yeah. So I came here to speak to, journalists, reporters, influencers, parliament members, and And so in Ottawa, we met a group of parliament members from both parties, people who will listen, but people who are really open to listen, because what we are going to face in the next few years, we see after the 7th of October, the entire Jewish community from all around the world understanding how our destiny is intertwined one in another. It's not just the Jewish community. It's the Christian community. It's the Indian community. It's the Iranian community. It's the Western society and civilization. What we see now is a war against radical Islam. On 7th of October, Iran had opened a full-on war on the only Western society, democracy in the Middle East, because we are a symbol. And what you see now is just the start of it. It's going to hit Europe. It's going to hit America. It's going to hit Canada, everywhere. They already have operation everywhere. And when we understand what's at stake and that our future and destiny is one, we need good people to stand up, to speak out, but to take actions and fight together.
Did you try to meet with Prime Minister Trudeau or with Pierre Poilievre or the other leaders?
So I met with Melissa Lantzman, which is really incredible. She really gets it. And I met with quite a few parliament members from the Conservative and from the Liberal Party. I think that message actually, it passed. I think they get it. They really understand it. I don't think that the people who are now holding ministerial positions in the Canadian government really understand that surrendering to the very loud and violent voices who are trying to, very aggressively push their agenda, they're not going to be open to hear it. They have completely failed our people, Israel, our country. They really turned their back on us. I think that with the history of the Israeli-Canadian relationship, we all expected different reactions. We expected we expected solidarity. I think the Canadians really used to understand it. I mean, Canada used to be the first one that stopped funding UNRWA. They got it. They understood what's happening there. Right now they didn't just reinstated the funding, but they're actually topping it every few months. They're adding more and more money. Now, trust me, I want humanitarian aid to reach Gazans, but the more you contribute to UNRWA, that's not going to get there. Hamas is pocketing half of the humanitarian aid. They're selling it in the market. They don't have the logistics or the capability of distributing it. Right now, there are hundreds of trucks on the border waiting for those UNRWA workers to just come and pick them up. They're not capable of that kind of operation. They never were. There are organizations that can, like the World Food Organization, UNICEF, and so many other United Nations organizations that can, but the United Nations doesn't want them there, because they don't want to compromise UNRWA. UNRWA is more important to them than hungry Palestinian children. That's what Guterres told them as well. When Canada, America, and other countries wanted to divert the funds from UNRWA to other organizations because they just stopped it and they wanted to pass humanitarian aid, he told those organizations not to take their money. And the fact that the Canadian government keep on sending those funds, expending those funds without any kind of responsibility, transparency, accountability, that will cost lives. That will cost lives of Israelis. And the rhetoric that the Canadian foreign minister is using, and the moves that she's making, this is like a knife in our back, to be honest, really.
When you were in Ottawa, you were greeted by, I read, a small pro-Palestinian protest group. Were you prepared for the level of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, anti-Israel sentiment that we are seeing here when you got here?
Look, I'm also an ex-combat soldier. I'm not intimidated easily. Okay. Just last month, I went to Oxford with a demonstration, pulled out an Israeli flag and waved it very proudly. Okay. I know the truth is with us. I know we are the good guys. Okay. On the
I didn't mean
contrary,
it that way. I didn't mean it to be scared personally. I meant
the,
the way that Canada
the,
has been in the world
yeah,
until now. And then you see campus anti-Semitism, you see
yeah,
violence against
yeah.
synagogues. And who do you think is behind it?
Canada has always been in my eyes, and I know many Israelis, and I know most of the Jewish community around the world. Canada has always been the safest place for Jews. I mean, this is the last place where I would imagine Jews would be violently attacked, being treated uh, uh, terribly. That rise of anti-Semitism, Canada would be the last place I would expect it. And that's why it's so disappointing to see it here. I know what's pushing it all around the world. I think in Canada, there's not enough research because people are too scared to point the real problem.
All
And,
right. So
and
what is it? Who is it?
there's a race for the last few decades, a race for Islamic dominancy between the Muslim Brotherhood, Iran, and Turkey mainly. Okay. That race is a violent, dangerous, and aggressive one. It's not just being fought on the ground like you see with Iran, who's leading that race. Having armies in Yemen like the Houthis and Hezbollah in Lebanon and in Syria and Iraq and almost everywhere. They have well set operations in Central and South America. They are the biggest traffickers of drugs and illegal weapons in Central and South America. Okay, and the amount of money that is circulating there is what's really funding Hezbollah and Iran. Now, they're not just fighting with troops on the ground. This is also and obviously it is an ideological war, but it's also being battled in the media and definitely on social media. If you read, there's a memorandum that was seized in 2007 in an Islamist home in Washington, D.C. It's a document that was sort of put together by the Muslim Brotherhood, how to infiltrate Western society, especially America. They speak about how to come in through Muslim communities, civil society organization, push their public opinions and their ideology through media, social media, and especially through the language of the progressive, okay? The oppressed and the oppressor and all that kind of language that they're hijacking to push their ideology and their way of life. And it goes on all the way to explain how to create a Sharia state. So you need to understand that's the end goal of those Islamists, okay? That's radical Islam. And what you see in Canada is people that are too afraid to put it on the table and discuss it. As soon as you start discussing radical Islam, Islamist, that idea, people label you and shut you down and shut your mouth saying, you're an Islamophobe.
Who are these people that are afraid, that you're saying is afraid to raise it?
I think many of the representatives look on Jewish leadership. Jewish leadership is in main position. It says a lot, not doing enough. And when you look on people who are trying to raise this issue, I mean, how come in Canada there's not any research? Okay, there's very little. There is some, but very, very little in comparison to what you see in Europe and in America.
Research about what?
For example, look on Students for Justice in Palestine. This is not a grassroots organization. This is a well operation funded by Qatari money, by people who have ties to Hamas, to Hezbollah, to Islamic Jihad. We know that. Okay.
Well, there was a
It's
report that just came out, as a matter of fact, earlier this year by a Canadian, Charles Small. He's based in New York now, that talked
Mhm.
specifically about this. His institute for, I think it's called IGPS or something. I don't have the name right in
Okay.
front of me, but there was research done. But again, so are you talking about Canadian political Jewish leaders, as in members of parliament, members of provincial parliament? Or are you talking about community leaders like federations and B'nai B'riths and those? Who are you talking about that aren't doing enough?
Look, I'm not here to really put too much criticism. I know how difficult it is, regardless, with the rise of anti-Semitism. But in Canada, more than in other countries, when you start discussing these issues, you are being attacked as an Islamophobe. The conversation about Islamophobia is far louder than I've noticed in any other country.
Well, we have a special envoy now for combating Islamophobia.
So you understand the narrative, you understand where that kind of voice is pushing, and it goes straight into the hands of those groups like the Muslim Brotherhood and Iran, who are trying to spread their idea in Western civilization.
Well, to be fair, there were murders of
Mhm.
several Islamic family members, and 6 people were shot down. I mean, I'm not having a debate with you about this week talking about Israel, but Canada did
I'm
have
not
Muslims
saying, look,
murdered in cold blood, whereas the Jews have had not.
I didn't say it doesn't exist, but I'm saying you cannot shut down a real conversation by saying that. I mean, look,
Right.
Muslims are the biggest victims of radical Islam. They've murdered millions. Look on the Iranian people. Look on what's happening in Afghanistan. It's absolutely insane. They're the first one to get hurt by it. It's something that they need to talk about it. We need to talk about it.
But I do want to ask you about one thing when you're talking about UNRWA. You're on the committee in the Knesset that is tasked with thinking about what the future will hold after the war is over. What, for you, does the solution look like, and whether UNRWA is in it or not?
Look, to be honest, UNRWA is the issue of the day after. UNRWA is an organization that supplies governmental services like education, housing, healthcare, all the way to street sweepers and sewage system and water. Okay. Is it necessary? Yes, because there isn't a Palestinian leader that wants or can take that responsibility. On the contrary, whenever they can, Hamas pushes their responsibilities toward UNRWA, and so they expand UNRWA more and more and more. So if we agree that there isn't a Palestinian leader that can or want to take responsibility for its people and really look after them, then I believe that UNRWA has to be majorly reformed if it can, and if not, then a parallel body similar to that needs to be built, where there's an international committee, including Arab countries, okay, like the Emirati, Moroccan, the Saudis, Egypt, and Jordan, including America, Germany, and other European countries who are big, Canada, who are big sponsors of the Palestinian people and pay for their services as well. And through that committee, they need to build an organization that the manager positions are all held by international foreign workers who have a lot of experience in humanitarian aid organizations, and can supervise that this organization does not become corrupt or compromised by a terrorist organization, and reform completely the education system in Gaza, so that maybe one day the children of Gaza might want to live side by side with Jews and not try just to murder them or genocide them. We've done something similar with the Abraham Accords in Arab countries to reform the education system to make sure that they take out anti-Semitic content, making sure that the education system build bridges between the next generation. And this is something that has to happen because I'm a true believer in education. And I really think that can change things. And if that really happens, and, the workers in this organization are not terrorists, are not affiliated with terrorist organization, they keep the law of neutrality, and maybe another second or third generation grow with a different kind of education, maybe there'll be a Palestinian leader that will want to take care of its people, that will want to live side by side with the Jews beside Israel, that will understand that no one's going anywhere and we have to find a way to live together. And so if you ask me what I think needs to be the day after, we have to start talking about it, and that's what it needs to be. I think that anything else, we'll just find ourselves repeating over and over again, the same that's been repeated for the last 75 years.
Last question. 4 members of your party pulled out of the unity government a couple of months ago because they weren't happy with the way the war was being directed.
Mm-hmm.
What's your take on how Netanyahu is proceeding with this war, as we have a northern front that may soon be the next invasion area?
So I hear what they say in the international news. Look, Netanyahu is not managing his war. He's managing. This is Israel's war. This is Israel's second independent war. Okay. And the way that we're going to finish this war is going to dictate whether my children will be capable of living in Israel or not. How it's been going, we've criticized him, but not from the point that the Western media is trying to portray it through the eyes of Al Jazeera, because that's where they're taking a lot of their pieces. We are criticizing him because in the last 4 months, there's actually been a quiet ceasefire that's been pushed by international pressure. And we've criticized it because we knew that in those 4 months of a quiet ceasefire, Hamas is not going to surrender to a deal. He's not going to approve any kind of deal that will bring our family members back home. And that's
which the government just announced that there's only probably 80 left alive.
Yeah. So those 4 months cost the life of so many people. And they shouldn't have surrendered to the international pressure. They should have continued in a full operation into Rafah, into the Philadelphia crossing, and get that. I mean, the only reason why Hamas agreed to the last agreement of releasing of hostages is because there was so much military pressure on him. And so that was, a bad decision of that government, including being silent about our northern border. They need to start making the decision. They need to put aside the international pressure. We have to defend ourselves. This is the life of our children, of our family. It's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. And the enemies, not just of Israel, but of the entire world, are looking on what's going to happen in Israel. The international community has shown such weakness that their appetite has grown. And unfortunately, and it's heartbreaking to say that, you will see those aggressors like Russia and Iran, North Korea and China that are already having military training together. You'll see them continuing to push the boundaries, but we cannot afford them to push the boundaries on the expense of Israel. So we have to stand on our own ground, defend ourselves, and put aside that international pressure.
All right. Are you, by any chance, are you walking in the Walk for Israel on Sunday, or you're leaving before?
No, I'm unfortunately leaving before. I would have loved to do that, but we have very, very important bills that are coming on Monday morning. So I have to be back. But I just want to send my love and a big hug to the Jewish community that is standing so tall and so bravely. And I pray that this government is going to wake up and start protecting them and defending them like they should. Because from what I see, especially with the shooting and attacking synagogues and everything, it's not a question of whether it will happen, but the question is when it will happen. And so I pray for the community here in Canada. I love it dearly, and we're here for you.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily. The study that we talked about during our interview, which traced Qatari money to American universities, was published by Charles Small. The former Montrealer runs the Institute for the Study of Global Antisemitism and Policy. It's based in the U.S. and is partly funded by the Israeli government. The foundation that brought Haskel here, the Exigent Foundation, was set up a few months ago by the former Canadian ambassador to Israel, Vivian Berkovich, who runs a news site called The State of Tel Aviv, and by Toronto construction company owner Larry Mayer. The pair also brought Canadian journalists and influencers to Israel earlier this year to see the impact of October 7th. Our podcast is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and our music is by Dov Beck-Levine. Thanks for listening to the CJN Daily.
Y'all remember that joke from Airplane? The old lady asked for some light reading.
How about this leaflet, famous Jewish sports legends?
But in actuality, that's changing. Jews are crushing it in sports around the world, and we are here to celebrate them.
Sandy Koufax gets his 10th strikeout.
Zach Hyman, his first career hat trick. 41 points for Diddy Avdia. It's Sue Bird's building.
I'm Gabe.
And I'm Jamie.
We love Jews and we love sports, but most of all, we love kvelling over Jews in sports.
Together we host Menschwarmers, the longest-running Jewish sports podcast in the world. Listen and subscribe at thecjn.ca and wherever you find your podcasts.